Hey everyone, my name is Katie Dunn and I am with the City of Norton, and we're back for our next digital outdoor chat. And today we're joining Wally Smith, an associate professor of biology at the University of Virginia's College at Wise. And today Wally is going to be talking about the different amphibians and reptiles that you can find in Flag Rock Recreation Area and on High Knob.
Well, hey everybody, my name is Wally Smith. I'm an associate professor of biology at UVA Wise, and we're here today in Flag Rock Recreation Area to go for a hike and look for some of the amphibian and reptile inhabitants that you can find here in the park, as well as in the Wise County and City of Norton region. And I know that a lot of people are probably familiar with Flag Rock and High Knob because you come here for maybe the views like I have behind me, possibly to hike on the trail, to picnic, to float, paddle on the reservoirs. But really we're also in a special area for reptiles and amphibians, especially amphibian diversity. We're actually in a global hotspot, we call it, of amphibian diversity here in Southwest Virginia, and especially in Wise County in the City of Norton. And even here on High Knob, in the area around the mountain, you can actually find upwards of 20 different species of salamanders alone. And so today we're going to go out and see some of that diversity. We're going to see some of the amphibians, some of the reptiles hopefully as well, you can find here in this region, and talk about what makes each of those species so unique. So we're here above the Norton Reservoir at a small headwater stream that's coming down and feeding the lake, and I thought it would be a good place to mention habitat for some of these salamanders, because the animals that we have in our area tend to fall into one of two different categories. You can have aquatic or semi-aquatic animals, that means those that live in and around streams like this one, and then you have terrestrial salamanders, which live more kind of in the uplands like we have here above the stream that we're at now. But what's really fascinating about some of these headwater streams is even though they may look like kind of a tumbling creek, there's not a lot of water here. And in a lot of cases in drier months, these parts of the stream will dry up. That means that the fish can't really live here permanently. There's not a big fish community here. And that's important for salamanders because they really like places where there are not a lot of fish. It's a very beneficial habitat for them because the fish would typically be predators of those salamanders and gobble them up pretty quick. So when it comes to a small stream like this, some of the dusky salamanders that we have, some of the other aquatic salamander species, they actually are the top predators in some of these streams, which is crazy to think about, that an animal no longer than your index finger could be a top predator in a stream food web, but they are. And there could be hundreds, if not thousands, or even tens of thousands of salamanders in a stream like this, but we never see them because they're down either in the water or they're in some of the rock cover that's around the edge of the stream. And that's important because when these salamanders are so abundant, they really help to drive what we call the functioning of these streams. They help for energy and nutrients as different animals eat one another to pass throughout the stream ecosystem. And it's a wonderful sign in a stream like this, we have a lot of salamanders, that this stream is probably pretty healthy. And that's a testament to what the City of Norton has done here, because the water that you see here is actually the city's source of drinking water. So protecting the forest that you see here, protecting this stream, that's been beneficial for the humans, and then also beneficial for the salamanders that live here. So we kind of hit the jackpot here under the same rock. The longer salamander that you see here is one of our most common terrestrial salamanders. It's called the southern ravine salamander, and it's named that way because one of the places where you find it is in rocky ravines. And we're not in a ravine here, but we are on a rocky hillside, and that's where this animal was. It was under some of the rocks. Most of the year you're not going to see these, but you will see them in the spring and in the fall. They're going to have two periods where for a couple weeks they'll become very active. This is a big adult here. You can see that beautiful brassy flecking that it's got. That's one of the ways to tell it apart. The other way is that it's very tubular in shape. It's very, very slender, and it has those tiny little legs with a long tail. Usually the brassy coloring is there on the tail. And these are super abundant. Like some of the stream salamanders we have, they are lungless. So they don't have lungs, and instead they breathe through their skin and the lining of their mouth. That's one of the reasons as well why we think the Appalachian region has so much salamander diversity, is because it's so humid here and so moist. There's also some pretty rough terrain. It's kind of like the perfect recipe for salamanders to thrive. So that's the southern ravine salamander. This one that has been sliming me as I've been talking, the little guy, looks to be a young slimy salamander. If you see an adult slimy salamander, they will be much bigger than this. They'll be bigger than the Ravine salamander. This is a very young one here. It's a juvenile, not very old at all, but you can tell that it's a slimy salamander by the black color and then the white to brassy flecking there on the back. And they're called the slimy salamander because their defensive strategy is to literally slime a potential threat. They have some glands at the base of their tail that secrete kind of an ooze, almost like the consistency of rubber cement. And if you're an animal, if I was going to pop this thing in my mouth and try to eat it, and it secreted that slime into my mouth, it would kind of gum my mouth up and I'd probably spit it out, and the salamander could go on its way. But they will get much bigger. These can be upwards of like 5 inches, 6 inches in total length. But you can see there the distinction between those and also the size difference. It's pretty cool to find both of those under the same rock. But we'll put them back here. Both of these are members of our terrestrial salamanders, the salamanders that live on land here in Wise County in Norton. All right, well, this is the ringneck snake. I would say one of the most abundant reptiles that we have around people's homes in our area. Although you may not know it, maybe you've never seen these before. They're probably around your yard, possibly even in your house, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because these snakes are completely harmless to people. They can bite, but if they do, their teeth are not that big. They're not going to do any kind of harm at all, even if they could. And they wouldn't want to anyway outside of a defensive strike because they predominantly eat bugs. They go after insects, small invertebrates, and that's going to be what they feed on. That also is why a lot of people like to have these around their house, because a lot of folks are not big fans of ants in their house or roaches, that type of thing. These snakes will go after those. And they're very easily identified by that bright colored ring that you see on the neck. The ground color, we call it, that's the background color. It could be black, brown, possibly gray. This one has a little bit of all three. But they're always going to have that bright colored ring around the neck. No other snake in our region is going to have that. That makes them very characteristic. And as you can see here, they also have a bright orange belly. This is just a beautiful snake. And you can see here, it's not trying to attack, it's not trying to hurt anybody, it's not chasing anybody down. It thinks I'm a predator, it thinks it's getting eaten. My hand is probably warm, so it likes that as well. But there's absolutely nothing to be afraid about with these snakes. As you can see here, they're not vicious killing machines. If you see one around your house, it's totally fine just to leave them alone. If you get one in your house, we have that happen all the time at my house here in Wise. If you're not comfortable picking them up, you can simply scoop them up with a dustpan. And obviously with any snake, you never want to pick up a snake that you can't identify. So if you're not comfortable, even if you do see that ring, you can simply scoop it up with some kind of foreign object. It may squirm a little, but it's going to do just like you see here, and then it's going to take off and go on its way. But just gorgeous animals, one of my favorite animals. It's actually behaving really well for us here, and that's one of our most characteristic snakes that you're probably going to be the most likely to encounter here in Wise County. Well, this is one of our aquatic to semi-aquatic salamanders. This is called the mountain dusky salamander. And you may find salamanders that look like this in and around streams on your property if you have them here in the county, or if you're out, doing a hike and looking in a stream and you see some brown colored salamanders like this one. The catch with these is that the genus that this salamander is in, that means the group of closely related species that all look similar and share some genetic similarity, they all tend to look very, very similar. They have kind of this brown background color. They may have different splotches, different possibly stripes, in some cases kind of orange colored stripes running down the tail. But what makes them all unique, what makes them in this genus called the dusky salamanders, is if you look really closely, there's a light colored stripe that occurs from the eye down to the corner of the mouth. And it may be tough to see on this individual just because it's so small, but any salamander that has that stripe from the eye down to the corner of its mouth is going to be a member of the dusky salamanders. And the way you can tell that a mountain dusky salamander apart from the rest of this genus is that mountain dusky salamanders tend to have kind of a roundish tail. If you think about taking a cross section of the tail and then looking at the shape, they tend to have this round shaped tail, which means that they tend to be a little bit more terrestrial or land based. And that's true because animals use that tail for movement on land. Animals that live in water, other members of this genus, tend to have more of a flattened tail that's kind of like a butter knife or a boat rudder, and they use that to move through the water. So that round shaped tail and cross section is really important for the mountain dusky salamander. And it's also important because this animal really lives kind of at the interface, we call it, between streams and the land. It lives sometimes in the water, other times you find it up in the forest. And that's really important because as they move back and forth between these habitats, they move energy around, they move nutrients around, they kind of help to keep the forest and the streams connected. So this is the mountain dusky salamander, one of several dusky salamanders that you can find in and around our streams. and probably the most common one that you're going to see here in the city of Norton. So this is one of our larger terrestrial salamanders that you're going to find in and around woods in our area. This is the Cumberland Plateau salamander. There's a related species that is similar genetically to this one that also looks the same, called the northern slimy salamander. Both of these have this black coloration with this kind of white or brassy flecking. But the way to tell these apart, if they cooperate enough for you to take a look at it at least, is that the Cumberland Plateau salamander tends to have a lighter colored throat to it, whereas the slimy salamander is darker. But both of these live in similar places in our region, and they also can be distinguished because when they're threatened, they secrete a very sticky ooze, almost like the consistency of rubber cement. And that's there as an anti-predator mechanism, where if I tried to pop this thing in my mouth, or if I was a raccoon or something out in the woods, that slime would get squirted in my mouth, it would gum my mouth up, I would spit the salamander out, and it would probably go off on its way. So if you ever find one of these and you handle it, you tend to get that sticky slime on your hands, and that's what gives this particular salamander some of its unique characteristics. And again, this is the Cumberland Plateau salamander. So we have a lot of amphibian diversity here in Southwest Virginia. One thing that we don't have quite as much of is reptile diversity. And that's true of our lizards. We only have 2 lizard species that are native to our region. And this is one of those, the eastern fence lizard. It gets its name because a lot of times it's seen perching on fence posts and rails in the area, good places to sun or to forage for food. And the best way to identify these is that sometimes they look like a miniature dragon. They've got scales, they've got claws like all lizards. They also have eyelids. Our salamanders lack eyelids and lack those scales. And when you see a big adult version of this is kind of a younger lizard here, a lot of times they can look almost like a miniature dragon. But they're also very beautiful. This one doesn't really show it, but if you ever find a male in the breeding season, they have a bright blue coloration on their belly, which they use to advertise for potential mates. That's a very unusual color to see in animals. So a beautiful animal, one that you can find in sunny places like the spot that we're at here, again around human dwellings, places like fences, and it's the eastern fence lizard. This is an animal that I really didn't expect to see today, not because they're not really common, just because they're kind of difficult to locate sometimes. You have to happen across them. This is the long-tailed salamander, and it's named because it has a long tail. We tend not to name salamanders very confusingly. And you can sort of see that on this specimen. They tend to be kind of orange, almost tangerine in color. And the tail, besides being long, often has little black chevrons or V's running down the back. That's the way that you can tell them apart. This one primarily lives in woodlands. I tend to find them a lot around rocky areas that have good rock cover that's shaded and cool. And like all the other salamanders that we've seen today, this individual is lungless. They breathe entirely through their skin and the lining of their mouth, which is something that's really characteristic of a lot of the salamander diversity that we have here. Also a great place in Appalachia for these to live because it's very humid, it's very moist, and that helps these individuals breathe across their skin. So another salamander that you may find here in the region, the long-tailed salamander. All right, what you're seeing here is a red eft, that's EFT, and these are really commonly seen running around in the woods this time of year. They tend to be pretty brave and aren't too shy compared to some of our other salamanders. And what this is just one part of the life stage of the red spotted newt, which is an animal that you may have seen the adult forms of floating and hanging around in some of the wetlands and ponds and lakes in our area. And what makes these kind of different from other salamanders is that all newts are salamanders, but not all salamanders are newts. And what differentiates this species is this red F stage. This is kind of an extra life stage that the organism has that's different from the larval stage or the tadpole stage that other amphibians have. Most of our salamanders start out at an egg stage. They then have a larva or a tadpole-like kind of immature form that lives in a wetland or aquatic habitat somewhere. And the newts have this extra stage where they kind of have a teenage version where these Fs will come out of the pond, wander around the woods for a little while, and then eventually they'll go back to the pond and transform into adults. So they look very different if you see the F versus the adult, but they're the same species. They're one of our local species that lives in wetlands and ponds, and this version, the F, you may see walking around in the woods. This is the eastern box turtle. This is one of the turtles that people see the most often out on the road or possibly around their house. It kind of roams around in some areas, maybe hanging out in the woods around your home or in the woods up here on High Knob. And they're interesting for a couple of reasons. They're actually our only turtle locally that can totally close up its shell. On the bottom part of the shell, the turtle has 2 hinges that essentially allow that shell to close up. and seal most of the turtle off if there's a threat. And that's a defensive strategy that the box turtle has. They also tend to be very good navigators. And one thing, unfortunately, that a lot of people do when they see these turtles is they pick them up, they take them home as a pet, they try to turn them loose a little bit later, and unfortunately, if they turn them loose in a different spot, the turtles try to head home and a lot of times find a road and get hit by vehicles. So it's really important, if you do see one of these, don't take it home, don't mess with it, simply leave it alone, take a look at it, grab some photos, and then let it go on its way. And if you see them in the road, it is okay to move them to the other side of the road, but just be careful if you do, and look for traffic if you're getting out in the road if you see one of these on the pavement. So this is the eastern garter snake. It is actually the official state snake of Virginia. It is one that is seen pretty often around people's homes and in the woods up at places like High Knob and Flag Rock. This is another really harmless snake. It's not venomous whatsoever. Usually it's pretty docile, and even if it did strike, couldn't do too much damage at all. It's going to view humans as predators. So like with all snakes, if you see this animal, a good thing to do is just to give it a wide berth and let it go on its way. There is a closely related species called the ribbon snake that you can find to the east of our area. I don't believe it's been recorded here in Wise County, and this looks a lot like a garter snake, but is a little bit thinner, kind of like a ribbon, and also has a clear or kind of pale colored face with no dark markings along the lip scales, which the garter snake has. So if you are in surrounding parts of Southwest Virginia, other parts of the state, that's one thing to look for if you see an animal like this. But in our area, again, an animal that has these stripes running down the back, that has this type of pattern, that's going to be the eastern garter snake. And again, we don't name our salamanders too confusingly, and this animal is a great example. This is the green salamander, and you can see how it gets its name. It has this beautiful kind of emerald green coloration that's on a black ground color in the background. And this animal is really unique because unlike a lot of our other salamanders that you typically find under a rock or a log on the forest floor or in a stream, the green salamander really likes rocks. And specifically, it likes vertical rock outcrops, places where it can crawl and it can climb. In the summers, occasionally, it gets up and around the canopy of trees. It climbs out 30, 40, 50 feet even up in the trees surrounding rock faces. So a really interesting animal, and it has some really cool adaptations that allow it to do that. It may be tough to see because this one's kind of small, but it has square toe tips that are sticky. So if you think about the way tree frogs in the tropics tend to climb, they have similar kind of suction cup toes. This animal has those. And it also tends to be flattened. It's almost like somebody has sat on it and made a pancake. And that helps it not only to climb, but also to fit back into tight spaces, like into crevices and rocks. So they're seldom seen. A lot of people typically don't see these, but if you do live around rock outcrops or you're hiking somewhere where there's a lot of cliffs, most of Wise County is a great example of that, you may see these. And if you do see these, consider yourself lucky because they're a really interesting animal. If you do see these, we're trying to understand where these live in the area. So if you are out hiking, or especially if you have one of these around your home, feel free to snap a photograph of it. Look me up at the college. My email address is on the college website. Send us that photo, let us know where you found it, and that can help us study this animal because this is a species that we are very interested in. These, like other salamanders, also don't make great pets, so we encourage people, if you do see them, try not to handle them, don't take them home, don't try to keep them. They don't tend to do too well in captivity, but they are a really interesting animal to observe at a distance, get some photos of, and then let them go on their way. So the green salamander, one of our most unique and characteristic species that you can find here in Wise County in the city of Norton. Well, a great place to look for salamanders or frogs or even things like snakes and lizards in our area is under what herpetologists call cover. And this is a wonderful example here with this giant kind of knot of wood. Cover just refers to anything that's on the forest floor. That's kind of the home that a lot of our reptiles and amphibians are going to be within. And when you're looking for these, if you're looking at home in your backyard or in like a small stream, really there aren't a lot of rules for how to find these animals, but a really good rule of thumb if you are going to look is if you have cover like this that you want to look under, I will usually encourage folks to pick it up, kind of face it away from you, so if there is anything under there with a stinger or with teeth or something that can hurt you, it's going to go the other way from where you're lifting. There's nothing under here, but if there was, you could scoop it up. Typically, you don't want to grab animals by the tail because their tails can break off. And after you're done looking at that animal, make sure to put it back where you found it. And I always tell folks to put the cover back, like with this, as close as you can to how you found it. And I always tell kids the reason for that is like if somebody came and tore the roof off your house and they didn't put it back on, you couldn't live there very long. And the same thing goes with cover in the woods. If you take the cover away, don't put it back, that's where the animals are living and they lose their home that way. So it's a great place to look. We'll see if we can find some stuff as we go on through the rest of the day, even though this didn't have anything underneath it. But if you have any kind of cover like this around your house, it's a wonderful spot to look, as long as you take care to make sure you're not reaching under where something has teeth or a stinger before you do.
Well, thanks for joining us today for our second outdoor chat. We really thank Wally for taking us around Flag Rock and searching for the different amphibians and reptiles that you might find when you're out here. And next time we're going to be joining Chelsea and Justin Barnes, and they'll be talking about the lessons they've learned while backpacking in the outdoors.